Glad to welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Vasyl Chaika, and today we will talk about a disease that mainly affects middle-aged men. It also affects women, particularly when they experience menopause. Hippocrates also once called this disease the illness of aristocrats and nobility, people of middle and upper wealth. Today we will talk about gout. You will understand why it actually occurs, what you need to do to help yourself, and what you really have to do so that this disease bypasses you and never develops in you. Let's get started. In medicine, it is believed that the cause of a condition like gout is an increased level of uric acid in the blood. And it is this uric acid that is the enemy, destroying our joints and our kidneys. There are also three theories regarding the causes of uric acid accumulation. The first is that for some reason, uric acid is not being eliminated from our body. And most likely the opinion is that this is a pathology of the kidneys. For example, with pyelonephritis or glomerulonephritis, gout should occur. But that's not the case. Not everyone who has, for example, pyelonephritis or glomerulonephritis develops gout. The second theory states that it is the increased synthesis of uric acid in our body that leads to the development of gout. And this is associated with certain types of diseases that are characterized by an increased number of cells and their subsequent destruction. For example, in leukemia or for instance in psoriasis or in other diseases where there is increased cell destruction. But not everyone with these diseases develops gout. The third theory is that gout is caused by consuming more so-called purine-rich foods. What are these foods? These are, for example, wine, coffee, fatty cuts of meat, fatty varieties. Fish, for example, shellfish, and even spinach. So the cause of gout is an improper diet, which is based on excessive consumption of proteins and carbohydrates. One of the earliest signs of gout is what people commonly call a bunion on the foot, starting to get inflamed. That is, the metatarsophalangeal joints begin to get inflamed, they swell, there is sharp pain, and the person seeks medical attention. And when a uric acid test is done and its level in the blood exceeds 500 to 600 micromoles per liter, of course, gout is suspected. And they say that it is gout, or rather uric acid itself, that starts to deposit in your joint and begins to destroy it. That is the so-called articular form of gout. Another variant is when they say there is a renal form of gout, which is when stones form in the kidneys, specifically uric acid stones. So in fact, there are two forms. How is the diagnosis made? It's clear that this involves laboratory tests, where we determine the level of uric acid. Normally, the uric acid level should be 200 to 400 micromoles per liter. If it is above 500, this is considered an increased risk of gout. So-called tophi can also be detected. They are often found using ultrasound or, for example, with an X-ray, when you take an X-ray of the joints. There we can see the deposits of these uric acid salts. Of course, based on these causes, the treatment is as follows. First of all, it's always about limiting something, specifically the intake of purine bases into our body. This includes everything we love: meat, vegetables, and for some, alcohol. These need to be limited, and this should help us, but it doesn't help everyone. Another option is medication therapy, when we prescribe, for example, allopurinol, but also in large doses. This doesn't help people either. So what is the reason? Why does gout occur? And why does the treatment being used not produce results? Thank you. Let's look into this from the perspective of a comprehensive approach. And this is important to understand. Another very important point, which for some reason no one wants to talk about, is that the purine bases themselves are extremely important for our bodies. In particular, they are necessary for preserving and transmitting our genetic information. In other words, for us to be able to continue our lineage. They are also necessary so that these purine bases enable cell division and for the synthesis of proteins. In other words, purine bases are extremely important. Additionally, purine bases stimulate urination, meaning we start to urinate more. Purine bases, for example, such as caffeine, stimulate our nervous system. Purine bases also dilate, in particular, the capillaries in the brain, heart, and kidneys. In other words, purine bases are extremely important for our body. But then why are they blamed for what is called gout? Because the principle in our medicine is very simple. If we find something and there are symptoms present, it seems logical to think that these very substances are the cause, for example, of gout itself. By that logic, when we see a fire and there are firefighters present, then the cause of the fire would be who? The firefighters. If we see an accident and there are police officers standing on the road whom we know are there to help, then from a scientific point of view, it would be logical to assume that the police officers are the cause of the accident since they are present there. That's the kind of simple pseudo-logic we're talking about. But from a comprehensive approach, gout is actually very simple to understand. It's a combination of two reflexes. The first reflex is the reflex of the skeletal system. The essence of this reflex, if we describe it in simple biological terms, is the inability to maintain balance, or the inability to hold on to the social status you desire. That's why people, aristocrats, the wealthy, scientists, who probably deserved a certain status, always tried to maintain it. And they were constantly at risk of what? That they might lose it. In other words, there was what you might call instability. This is also very easy to check physically. For example, if you stand up and someone, your husband or wife say, starts rocking you like this, you'll notice that in order to stay balanced on the surface using your feet, you'll tense up the inner part of your foot, specifically that area. It's precisely those metatarsal phalanges that help you stay balanced on the surface. So if psychologically, for example, if you can't keep your balance on a surface, for instance, when you drink, a drunk person always starts to sway, which is why gout is often associated with drinking. No, it's actually a reflex showing that I can't stand firmly on the surface. And another point, when you don't drink, for example, you lead a healthy lifestyle, but you still experience this situation when a joint is involved. This happens when your social status might be at risk. You are virtually unsteady on this surface. So what kinds of situations could these be in our lives? In our lives, it's the society we live in. That's why I might get fired from my job. There's no stability in the future. I don't know if I'll achieve something or if I can get it. I regret what I used to have and now I don't have it anymore. This constant instability, where I'm being shaken from side to side in society, leads to a decrease in self-esteem and the so-called osteoporosis develops. The amount of bone, tendon and muscle mass decreases specifically in the foot, particularly on the inner surface of the foot. As soon as a person experiences even a little bit of stability, something in their life normalizes, whether it's finances, social status, it doesn't matter, they start to see things differently. A healing process begins. This tissue, especially where there's a joint, a ligament or muscle, fills up with fluid. And the healing process occurs through inflammation. And we all know the 5 signs of inflammation. What are they? There's swelling from fluid buildup, there's pain, that's why pain occurs. Next, there's an increase in local temperature with redness, so the joint becomes red and swollen. And finally, there's loss of function, meaning you temporarily can't use it. Everything would be just like that and the pain wouldn't be so severe. But why is the pain in gout so intense and severe, causing such suffering for a person? And here, the issue is the kidneys. For the pain to be intense and strong, there needs to be a lot of fluid in that area. This fluid, it is the kidney that pumps this fluid into the joint, into the area of inflammation. In other words, the kidney is responsible for the amount of fluid in our body. And when, along with the healing of the joint, there is also an active kidney reflex, this leads to the amount of fluid in that area increasing tenfold. This increases the intensity of the malfunction tenfold. But what makes the kidney work like this? What kind of conditions does a person have to be in for this fluid to accumulate there? A person has to end up in conditions that are called, biologically speaking, this is a dead end. So what does a dead end mean socially? A dead end? A social dead end. This happens, for example, when a person goes abroad, when they are separated from their usual environment, or for instance, when a person sees no prospects for the future, when they have no goal in life, when they feel abandoned and lonely because, for example, no one communicates with them, or for example, they can't do what they love. Or for instance, they are not accepted by society, they are not understood. In other words, they feel like an outcast. Or when a person is forced to do something they don't want to do. These could be certain medical procedures or other situations where the person realizes there is no way out. I don't want to, but I have to. I don't want to live with this man, for example, but I have to for the sake of the children. I don't want to go to that job, but I have to so that my family can somehow survive. That is, all these conditions will involve an active kidney reflex. So how does this work at the level of the kidney? The kidney is an organ that filters our blood. It separates the formed elements and essentially separates water and waste products and then removes them. For this, the kidney has a specific structure. It is made up of these thin tubules. On average, there are about 2.5 million of these tubules in each kidney. And these tubules are what provide filtration. It's just like taking a sieve, for example, a colander. When you pour water in, the water flows through all these holes. But when a person finds themselves in a hopeless situation, for biology, a hopeless situation means one thing. It's the absence of water, or there isn't enough water. The same situation occurs when, for example, you take a fish out of water after catching it, meaning you remove it from the environment it is used to living in and put it on land. Immediately, its kidney reflex is triggered to retain water in order to prolong its life. This is a biological situation, but for people, there can also be social situations which we have discussed. And in such cases, the kidney begins to retain excess water in our body by closing a large number of these tubules. As a result, salts that should be eliminated from our body begin to accumulate in our blood. Not just uric acid, but others as well. And it is precisely at this point that people mistakenly start to believe that uric acid is the cause of gout because it accumulates in the joints. No. This happens because during that massive swelling, which occurs due to the kidney retaining water, there is simply a lot of uric acid in the blood. It is not the cause, it is simply present at that moment. Of course, if these situations keep repeating, uric acid will accumulate in the area of inflammation, and then all those changes we talked about earlier will start to occur. So, what should you actually do to help yourself if you have gout? So first of all, this is it. We need to create conditions so that the kidney does not retain water. In other words, biologically remove that sense of hopelessness. How can this be done? The best way, of course, is to change your place of residence. For example, where are you currently located? If you have moved to a country where you feel uncomfortable, move to another country. If you feel uncomfortable in the village where you live, move to another one. In other words, only a biological change of place, that is, finding an environment that is comfortable for you, will immediately turn off this reflex. But people say, well, it's not that easy to do. Yes, it's not that easy from a social perspective, but from a biological point of view, it's very simple. The second very important point is this. If you can't do that, you need to start thinking differently. How so? We are all human beings. What does it mean to be human? Humans! We are biological beings who live on planet Earth. Not in Ukraine, not in the USA, not in Israel, not in Canada, but on planet Earth. That is, any point on our planet, wherever we may be, is our home, our native, natural environment. That's why, wherever we are, we feel comfortable. So in this way, if it is specifically related to changing your location and an uncomfortable environment, you can help yourself. Additionally, what you can do is already at the physical level. Here, we need to create conditions so that the body does not experience a water deficit. So how is this done? So the first step is a salt bath. That is, our body physically needs to be immersed in water. We take a bath and fill it halfway with water. For this half bath of water, which is about 100 liters, we add 900 grams of regular salt. In other words, we create what is called a saline solution. And we immerse ourselves in it, staying in this saline solution. The water temperature should not be hot. It should be 37, at most 38 degrees Celsius. Why exactly this option? Because this way, we simulate the safest and most comfortable conditions possible for our brain and body. This is our intrauterine existence. When we floated inside our mother's womb, in that water, so we are imitating that. This allows us to turn off that reflex for the duration of time you are in the bath. What else can we do additionally? In order for these canals not to close so intensely, we need a lot of sodium bicarbonate. But where can we get this sodium bicarbonate? These are all alkaline waters. The best and most effective way, and the simplest thing we can use, is baking soda. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. That is, during gout attacks, we can use the most alkaline drinks possible. So basically, we can take a glass of water, add a tablespoon of sodium bicarbonate, and drink it. But you need to remember one very important thing. The baking soda needs to be neutralized first. How is this done? You take a tablespoon of baking soda, put it in a glass of water, add boiling water so that it fizzes, and only then top it up to the top of the glass with regular water. Only in this way can we use it. Of course, the best way to use it is with so-called medical-grade baking soda, because it doesn't contain preservatives or the so-called E500 leavening agent. Regular baking soda does contain it, but for a gout attack, to reduce a gout attack, we can use a bath, and in this case, this option with regular baking soda can be used. Additionally, you can also use the following. This means reducing physical activity. Why? Because if you have heavy, intense physical activity, what happens? There is increased cell breakdown. An increased cell breakdown will what? It will provoke an increase in uric acid. So in addition, we need to maintain the normal level of uric acid in our blood. What else can we do? Some of you might say, of course, it's about diet. But diet has very little effect on this, because it's not about the diet. The reason is that a person is in certain conditions. By changing these conditions, a gout attack and even gout itself can disappear very quickly. Additionally, when it comes to diet, what we can do is combine foods properly. When in one meal we combine proteins, fats and fiber, in another meal we can combine carbohydrates and fiber. Here, it's important to know that the amount of food should be reduced. You don't need to eat a lot. We should eat just enough so that we are left feeling a little bit hungry. After 15 to 20 minutes, the feeling of fullness sets in, and as a result, we don't overeat. If you constantly overeat, you'll again have increased production of uric acid, and once more, you'll have a gout attack. So please remember this very simple thing. If you want to be healthy and not have joint problems, in this case, arthritis known as gout, the first thing you need to do is live in comfortable conditions for yourself. Not devalue yourself, eat properly, have moderate, measured physical activity, and look at the world with a positive attitude. Thank you all for your attention. This was Dr. Vasyl Chaika with you.